It was late, I was hesitant, and then she said it, the words that made my heart race. If you knock again this late, I'll let you stay over. The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel amplified. I walked home, my steps echoing softly against the pavement, the glow of street lamps reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain. It was late, later than I usually liked to be out, but something about the solitude felt comforting. That was when I noticed her, the window of the apartment across the hall illuminated by a soft, golden light. She was there, sitting in her favorite armchair, wrapped in a lightweight shawl, a book resting on her lap. Even from a distance, she radiated a kind of quiet elegance, her hair loosely pinned up, a few strands falling gracefully along her jawline, and the gentle curve of her smile as she turned the page. I paused, not wanting to intrude, yet unable to resist looking a little longer. Her gaze lifted, meeting mine through the glass. For a brief moment, it felt like the world outside ceased to exist. The faintest smile played on her lips, a mixture of amusement and mild admonishment. "It's late," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear, like a whisper meant for me alone. There was no scolding in it, only warmth, and something else I couldn't quite place. Curiosity, perhaps, or an unspoken invitation. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of my own pulse, the quickening rhythm echoing the flutter in my chest. There was a strange comfort in that moment, a quiet connection with someone I'd known by sight but not by heart. Her presence was at once familiar and intriguingly distant, like a melody I had heard but never fully understood. I noticed the little things, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the book, the subtle tilt of her head, the amber light spilling across her face and highlighting the gentle lines of experience that only added to her beauty. Even her apartment seemed to mirror her personality. Tidy but not overly so, warm and inviting without trying too hard, small personal touches everywhere that hinted at her life, her routines, her story. I lingered there a moment longer, unsure if I should continue on, my curiosity warring with the instinct to leave her to her night. The air was crisp against my skin, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and the subtle warmth from the lighted window. And then, almost as if she sensed my hesitation, she gave a tiny, playful shrug, her eyes glinting with quiet amusement. I smiled back, hesitant, aware that something was stirring, a quiet intrigue that promised more than simple neighborly familiarity. The night felt suddenly charged with possibilities, each step I took toward my own apartment echoing with a new sense of anticipation. That was the first night I truly noticed her, not just as my neighbor, not just as the woman living across the hall, but as someone who might slowly, quietly, unravel the ordinary rhythm of my nights and eventually, my heart. It was one of those nights when the air felt heavier, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I found myself standing outside her door, hesitant, unsure whether to knock or quietly turn back. My heart thudded in my chest, louder than the soft hum of the streetlights behind me. The memory of her soft admonishment from across the hall lingered in my mind. "It's late." And now, standing here, I understood there was more in those words than mere concern. Finally, curiosity won. I lifted my hand and tapped gently on her door. Almost immediately, the door swung open, revealing her in a simple, flowing blouse and a pair of comfortable slacks, her hair loosely tied back. Her expression was playful, almost teasing, and my breath caught at the sight of her. "If you knock again this late, I'll let you stay over," she said, her voice soft but carrying a subtle warmth that made my chest tighten. There was no pressure in her tone, just an invitation wrapped in amusement. I smiled, a little awkwardly, unsure how to respond, and she laughed quietly, the sound like the gentle chime of a bell, and stepped aside to let me in. The moment I entered, I was struck by how intimate her space felt, without being overwhelming. The golden light of a nearby lamp bathed the room in a gentle glow, highlighting the soft textures of her furniture and the carefully arranged personal touches, a delicate vase of fresh flowers, books stacked neatly on a shelf, framed photographs that hinted at a life full of memories and experiences. It was warm, welcoming, and undeniably hers. We settled into the living room, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. I noticed how naturally she moved, her gestures unhurried and graceful, and the subtle way her eyes lingered on me, as if she were quietly measuring my comfort, gauging my hesitancy. There was a delicate balance in her presence, confidence tempered with vulnerability, strength softened by warmth. Conversation began hesitantly, small talk about the night, about trivial things, but even in its simplicity, there was an undercurrent of connection, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us was here by accident. I found myself relaxing, drawn in by her quiet charm and the unexpected intimacy of the moment. And then there was the brush of her hand, brief and accidental, as she handed me a cup of tea. It lingered a second longer than necessary, warm and grounding, sending a subtle thrill through me. My gaze caught hers, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink around us, leaving just the two of us in a cocoon of quiet awareness. By the time I left that night, my mind was tangled with the sensation of warmth, the faint scent of her herbal tea still clinging to my clothes, and the unspoken understanding that something had shifted between us. I walked back to my apartment with a subtle smile, heart racing, acutely aware that this was the first night of something neither of us could yet name, but both of us could feel. The nights that followed her playful invitation became something I silently anticipated. It wasn't just curiosity that drew me to her door anymore. It was a quiet, steady pull, the kind that made the world outside fade the moment I stepped into her apartment. Each visit was slightly different, yet each carried the same warmth, the same comforting rhythm that seemed to wrap itself around us like a gentle blanket. Sometimes I brought her small things, a loaf of freshly baked bread from the bakery I liked, a cup of coffee just the way she took it, or a playlist I thought she'd enjoy. She accepted them with quiet gratitude, her soft smile and subtle glances making my chest tighten in ways I hadn't expected. It was in these small exchanges that the foundation of trust began to form, unnoticed at first, but steadily anchoring itself between us. Conversation flowed more easily now. We talked about her late husband with tenderness, not sorrow, shared small memories, mundane anecdotes, and dreams that felt safe to voice only in the quiet of her apartment. Her voice, low and melodic, had a way of drawing me in, making even the simplest remarks feel weighty with meaning. I noticed the way her hands moved when she spoke, delicate gestures, brushing strands of hair from her face, fingers lingering lightly on the edge of a mug. These little details fascinated me, each motion a glimpse into the woman she was beyond the surface. Physical closeness began to enter our routine naturally, as unspoken as it was electric. Sitting near her on the couch, our knees would brush, and I'd feel a warmth radiate up my legs, small but undeniable. Her arms sometimes brushed mine as she reached for a book, her touch light yet grounding. There was a rhythm to these moments, a subtle dance of proximity and restraint, charged with something more than friendship but careful not to leap into the obvious. One evening, she offered me a seat closer to the window. We watched the city lights twinkle against the night sky, her hand resting briefly on mine without comment, the simple pressure speaking louder than words. There was a quiet intimacy in that gesture, a mutual recognition that we were creating a space together, a cocoon where loneliness was held at bay and connection could flourish. I began noticing more of her, the way her shoulders relaxed when she laughed at my awkward jokes, the tiny crease near her eyes that deepened with amusement, the subtle scent of her perfume that lingered in the air, comforting and familiar. Even her silence felt weighted with meaning, the quiet acknowledgement of our shared presence more intimate than conversation could ever be. By the end of each night, I left her apartment with a strange mixture of longing and contentment. The anticipation for the next visit began to build, not as a rush toward romance, but as a desire to linger in the warmth of her presence, to be near someone who made me feel seen, safe, and quietly exhilarated all at once. These nights weren't dramatic, they didn't need to be. but in their slow, deliberate unfolding, they were shaping something profound. Something neither of us had named yet, but something that had begun to root itself firmly in the spaces between us. Even as our late-night visits became a gentle routine, I began to feel a quiet tension creeping in, an awareness of the walls we hadn't crossed, and perhaps shouldn't yet. The age difference hovered in my mind like a shadow, subtle but persistent. I was 24. She was in her early 40s. Not just the number, but the experiences, the losses, the life she had carried before me. Could I, in my youth, truly understand her? Could she trust me with the parts of herself that weren't meant for casual conversation? One evening, as I lingered by her doorway, the familiar warmth of her apartment spilling out into the hallway, my hesitation felt heavier than ever. She noticed immediately. The way her brow arched slightly, her lips curving into a knowing, patient smile. It was as if she could read my internal struggle without a single word spoken. "It's okay," she said softly, stepping closer. "You don't have to force yourself to stay if you're unsure." Her voice carried a gentle concern, yet there was an undercurrent of hope, a quiet challenge that made my chest tighten. I hesitated, acutely aware of the silence stretching between us. Inside, her apartment seemed unusually intimate that night. The warm glow of the lamp, the faint scent of vanilla from a candle, the soft creak of her floorboards as she moved. She gestured toward the couch, inviting me to sit. I did, slowly, deliberately, aware of the subtle brush of her hand as she adjusted a cushion near me. My mind raced, balancing desire with caution, attraction with respect. We talked, carefully. I asked about her day, her routines, her memories, but even these simple exchanges carried weight. At one point, she spoke of her late husband, not with sorrow, but with a gentle, lingering fondness. Her eyes glistened, and I instinctively reached out, my hand brushing hers, lingering just enough to offer comfort. The warmth of her skin against mine sent a ripple through me, stirring emotions I hadn't yet named. And yet, even in that intimate gesture, I hesitated. Could I really step into a space that was still marked by loss? Could I be someone she could lean on without replacing the past, without overstepping invisible boundaries? These questions gnawed at me, leaving a tension in my chest that I couldn't shake. She noticed the conflict in my eyes and simply smiled, her hand retreating but her presence unwavering. There was no pressure, no expectation, only an understanding that some things couldn't be rushed. That acknowledgement, paradoxically, brought both relief and longing. It reminded me that connection wasn't just about proximity or touch. It was about patience, about honoring each other's pace, and about letting something grow naturally, no matter how small or slow. That night, I left her apartment feeling the ache of unspoken words, the thrill of shared warmth, and the dizzying pull of emotions I wasn't yet ready to define. The hesitation lingered, but so did the undeniable bond, a quiet tension that promised something deeper if we were willing to navigate it together. The storm hit that night with little warning, thick clouds rolling in, rain hammering against the windows, and a low rumble of thunder that seemed to echo the rapid thumping of my own heart. I had come to her apartment as usual, expecting the comfort of familiar warmth, but this night carried a different kind of intimacy, one that neither of us could ignore. She opened the door to me, damp strands of hair clinging to her face, eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and quiet concern. "You really don't mind the rain, do you?" she asked, voice soft but tinged with teasing. I shook my head, stepping inside, the door closing behind me with a soft click that seemed to seal us in our own private world. The power had flickered out moments earlier, leaving her living room illuminated only by the amber glow of a single candle on the coffee table. Shadows danced across the walls, making every corner seem more intimate, more alive. She moved gracefully to the couch and patted the seat beside her. I hesitated just a second, then sat, careful of the tension that hummed in the air, the subtle charge of proximity, the unspoken acknowledgement of something growing between us. A blanket appeared, draped across our laps at her prompting, and the world outside faded into a blur of rain and distant thunder. We didn't need words at first. Our closeness spoke for us, her shoulder brushing against mine, the faint warmth radiating through the shared blanket, the quiet rhythm of our breathing matching without effort. Every accidental touch, every fleeting glance carried a weight far beyond friendship, yet we both respected the unspoken boundaries that had guided us until now. She handed me a cup of tea, and our fingers brushed lightly, lingering just long enough to make my chest tighten. Her eyes met mine, soft and steady, and I caught the subtle twitch of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. In that moment, the hesitation of previous nights seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet urgency that was both exhilarating and grounding. We spoke then, in low tones, about the storm outside, the city's rhythm in the rain, the little absurdities of our days. But beneath the casual conversation lay an undercurrent of honesty, a gentle revelation of how much we valued these moments together. When I admitted quietly that I looked forward to these nights more than I expected, she didn't reply with words at first. Instead, she leaned closer, resting her cheek lightly against my shoulder, the warmth of her presence radiating into me. My hand instinctively moved to the small of her back, not pressing, just holding, just grounding. Time seemed to stretch, measured by the shared space between us, the lingering glances, the subtle brush of her fingers against mine, the gentle rise and fall of our chests in tandem. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, yet everything was charged with meaning. That night, the emotional tension reached its peak, not in grand gestures, but in quiet, intimate moments that spoke louder than words ever could. As I left later, rain still dripping from my hair, I felt the slow burn of desire and connection, tempered by respect and care. It wasn't just attraction, it was the recognition that something rare and profound was forming between us, fragile but undeniable. The next evening, I found myself standing in the familiar hallway, my hand hovering over her door. The memory of the storm, the warmth of her presence, and the quiet intensity of our last night lingered in my chest, urging me forward. When she opened the door, she looked at me with that same knowing smile, but there was something softer, more open in her eyes tonight, a subtle invitation not just for my presence, but for my honesty. We settled into the living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting gentle shadows across her walls. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and damp earth from the rain earlier, comforting and familiar. For a long moment neither of us spoke, letting the quiet settle around us, letting the rhythm of our shared breaths fill the space. Then she spoke, her voice low, deliberate. "I've been lonely," she admitted, almost shyly. "Not just in the nights, but in the little things, the laughter, the company. I've missed that." Her words weren't dramatic, but they carried weight, vulnerability folded into restraint. I felt my chest tighten, the truth of my own feelings mirrored in hers. I feel the same," I said softly, careful to measure my words, but honest. "These nights, I look forward to them more than I should. And it's not just about being here. It's you. Your presence. The way it makes everything quieter, safer, warmer." My fingers brushed hers as I spoke, a tentative, grounding touch that said more than my words could. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest against mine, just the weight of her palm, warm and steady. Her eyes held mine, searching, questioning, and in that look, I saw recognition, not judgment, not fear, but understanding. We were two people, aware of the age difference, the pasts we carried, the careful pace we needed to take, but still drawn together by something undeniable. We talked for a long while, not about love yet, but about what mattered, our routines, our fears, our quiet hopes. Each revelation brought us closer, yet kept us tethered by respect and patience. At one point, she shifted slightly, letting her head brush my shoulder, and I felt the subtle pulse of connection, the shared heartbeat of two people cautiously but eagerly exploring a bond. No grand gestures, no rush, just a slow, deliberate acknowledgement of what we had begun. The subtle touches, the lingering of hands, the warmth of a shoulder against mine, the quiet glances, spoke volumes. In that moment, I realized that intimacy didn't need to be dramatic. It could be measured in small, intentional acts of care, the kind that made each night feel sacred. By the time I left, the evening air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of her candles mixed with the city beyond. But the warmth lingered in me, the certainty that we had acknowledged something real, something worth nurturing. I walked back to my apartment not with longing, but with quiet contentment, knowing that our connection had grown stronger, deeper, and that we were both ready to explore it without fear or hesitation. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly through the half-open curtains of her living room, casting warm streaks across the furniture. The faint aroma of coffee mingled with the subtle scent of vanilla from her candle, creating a sense of calm that felt almost sacred. I found her sitting on the couch, wrapped in a cozy cardigan, her legs tucked beneath her, a steaming mug cradled between her hands. Her eyes met mine, and that familiar gentle smile spread across her face, a smile that had, over the past weeks, become the anchor of my late-night walks home. "Morning," she said softly, voice carrying the kind of warmth that could melt lingering hesitation. I returned the greeting, feeling the nervous excitement of our slow, deliberate journey together. The night's emotional weight had settled into something tender, a shared understanding that our connection was real, meaningful, and safe. We settled together on the couch, close but careful, our knees brushing lightly. I handed her a small plate of pastries I had picked up, and she laughed at the clumsiness with which I had balanced everything. It was a simple laugh, but it held the depth of familiarity and affection that had grown between us, a shared intimacy without need for grand gestures. For a while, we didn't speak. We sipped coffee, letting the quiet stretch comfortably between us. I felt her hand inch toward mine, brushing against my fingers, a subtle gesture that needed no words. I intertwined our fingers gently, feeling the warmth of her skin, the soft pressure of her hand, and the quiet steadying of our hearts in tandem. There was no urgency, only recognition, a mutual acknowledgement that this closeness was both desired and cherished. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder, and I could feel the slow, comforting rhythm of her breath. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't hurried, it was quiet, profound, and deeply satisfying. In that stillness, I realized that our relationship wasn't defined by sudden leaps or grand declarations. It was defined by the small, meaningful moments we shared, the careful attention to each other's comfort, the gentle patience that allowed our bond to grow naturally. We talked quietly about plans for the day, mundane details that somehow felt intimate because they were shared. The laughter came easily, our conversation weaving around the comfort of routine and the thrill of the emotional closeness we had cultivated. Each glance, each subtle touch, her hand brushing mine as she reached for a mug, the soft pressure of her shoulder against mine, spoke volumes about the trust and affection we had nurtured. By the time I left, the sunlight had strengthened, bathing the hallway in golden warmth. I stepped back into the day carrying a quiet contentment, the feeling of belonging that comes from having found someone who sees you, understands you, and allows you to be entirely yourself. She waved softly from the doorway, and I returned the gesture, knowing that this was just the beginning. Our connection had been solidified, grounded in trust, patience, and affection, and the future felt full of promise, not rushed, but brimming with the kind of quiet happiness that makes the ordinary extraordinary.